And then meanwhile, I'll let Mr. King tell you a little bit more about him and kind of why he, well, we're not going to assume why. We're going to let him talk about why he agreed to participate in this conversation.
I was strong armed. Well, first of all, I want to thank the group for inviting me to share whatever information I can in regards to this subject matter around reparations. It's been around for a long time, and now coming more and more into the forefront. So thank you, Dr. Lawana Richmond, for inviting me. Dave, thank you, and Mike as well. I appreciate it. And I also want to thank all of you that may be listening in or and chimed in. So thank you for your curiosity and your support. As we discuss, a pretty comprehensive and challenging topic, but one that is, I think Kenya had mentioned it, very much needed to move forward. So she's coming back in. I guess she's trying to get it readmitted. I can see that on my computer. So and why I came into this is not only was I asked and invited, but I really believe in this work. As I was involved in it so many years ago, and as Lawana had mentioned, I founded and started the local chapter of Cobra here in San Diego. And I'll just say this, and I'll back off and give it back to Kenya. Cobra just really stands for the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And as we go through, maybe in our discussions, we'll find that there's other organizations that are in support of this of reparations as well. So that's what NCOBRA stands for, and we'll get into more of that later. But I'm going to give it back to Kenya.
Okay, thank you so much. And I apologize for the inconvenience. Something's going on with the computer audio jumped on another. I was saying thank you, Mike, David, and Dr. Richmond for inviting me here to talk about such a bold and needed topic that impacts the lives of not just Black people, but so many. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist that sees the ongoing trauma of Black people in our community, ongoing disparities in healthcare, education, incarceration. It's time for us to stop this pipeline to prison. It's unfortunate that my family left the South to come out here after a lot of threats. They had tons of land, but at the same time, when people threaten you, threaten your life, threaten your family, sometimes people have to move. People moved out west for a better life. There were still injustices here. As a marriage and family therapist, I understand that no one deserves to be traumatized just like you do. And so we're just trying to make sure we have an even playing field. But in order to do that, there are some serious situations that must be addressed with institutional racism that has been going on for 401 years. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. I'm honored to be here, but also I'm here to listen and learn and want to make sure this is a safe place to have this dialogue because it's not always easy to talk about. So thank you so much for having me.
All right. So before we get into dialogue, I thought it would be helpful to just show a little bit of context. So I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about what I'm showing you. Okay. The first thing is how many people are aware of the bill that was signed into law in October of last year? It was proposed by the Honorable Shirley Weber, and they passed a law to consider reparations for slavery. So they are the bill is to study reparations, and I can say working in higher education, studying is generally something that people are pretty safe doing. There are many topics that have multiple studies, and it'll, what comes out of that study, we're yet to see. But this is a story that was on CNN. California passes a first of its kind law to consider reparations for slavery. So this was 2020, slavery was abolished in 1863. So a little bit over 150 years, 170 years later, they decided that they'll study it. And then 3 days ago in Portland, can you guys hear that? I think my sound might be too low.
Blake Allen spoke with the senator sponsoring the
All right, here we go.
bill aimed at providing reparations for some Black Oregonians. Blake Allen spoke with the senator sponsoring the bill, as well as one prominent Black leader here in Central Oregon.
Oregon State Senator Lou Frederick grew up in close proximity to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
He was the father of my playmates, so I knew him as the dad who told me to quit running through the house.
He says Dr. King was an influence on him growing up, and he was an active member of the civil rights movement. Frederick is sponsoring Senate Bill 619 in Oregon, aimed at reparations for Black Oregonians. He laid out some of the historical disparities amongst Black Oregonians.
When you look around Bend, I would encourage you to take a look at a couple of the older land covenants, and you will probably find that the land covenants say that non-whites cannot own certain land in certain sections of Bend.
Frederick explained that there are two bills addressing the issue.
Is there a case to be made for reparations? That's what 618 does. 619 says if there is a case to be made, how would that be done?
The bill states, quote, "The Department of Revenue shall establish a program to pay reparations to Black Oregonians who can demonstrate heritage in slavery and who submit an application to the department no later than December 31st, 2022. The bill continues, the department shall pay each eligible applicant the amount of $123,000 in the form of an annuity payable annually for the life of the applicant." Although, as Frederick states, the bill is not concrete.
Part of governing, part of being in a situation like this is that you try to find some way that you can bring up issues and then discover just how you might resolve those issues.
Ricardo Waits from the Central Oregon Black Leaders Assembly doesn't think it'll pass.
Our country has supported reparations for almost everything except for slavery.
He's also doubtful many will qualify.
Who's gonna have evidence of their slave history? Our whole history is erased. So who's gonna have that knowledge?
Waits says he does want to see reparations, but outlined a somewhat different plan.
A small financial kickback, but more importantly, I want the government to give us reparations that allows, generational wealth to happen. So let's do something like something that gives us some type of break in purchasing a home.
He also would like to see more help with education for minorities. In Bend, Blake Allen, News Channel 21.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. All right, so now, just based on that, I have a question that I want to ask both panelists, and this is just me asking the question that many people either want to ask or have asked in the past when the topic of reparations comes up, and some of those questions were raised in the news piece that I just showed. And probably the biggest one is, let's say people decide, yes, there's going to be some reparations. How do we know? Who's going to be in charge of that? Like, how would that even be managed all these years later, when most people don't even know, like, how many generations can your average Black person trace their family?
Are you just asking this in general?
No, I'm asking the panelists.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, you want to go first, Lawana, or not? I don't have any problem. You want to go
Go
first?
ahead, you're talking, please.
Okay, well, that's fine. Yeah, well, there's still controversy in terms of how that would be done. That's why I know that everybody's tired of studies, but it just makes me hearken to this, and I hope I'm not, sidestepping the question too much. But I remember when there was reparations, if you will, or payments that were going to be given to some Native American tribes on the East Coast, it was just ironic at that point how many white folks declared that they were Native Americans, so the challenge is going to be about that, because oftentimes we already have challenges around, when we have multiple cultures in our families. And so we're going to have to work through that process and recognize that, because we do understand that those particular things take place. And most Black families that I know of, at this stage, but then maybe because I'm older, I'm no spring chicken, but I would certainly say that many and most Black families can go back 3 or 4 generations. And if you'll hear about them speaking of the trials that they've had to deal with, with their great grandparents or grandparents and such. So these are, it's almost like a griot telling a story, because we tell these stories in our families about what, who was connected to what back in the day. And especially, when it came time to looking at our families that are quite blended. I'm saying that very nicely, from slaveholders. So there's going to be a lot of work to really focus on in regards to that, because I just think that that's going to open up a lot of the floodgates, and we have to do a lot of filtering, if one would say.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
And to build on that, yes, some people want surveys, that's fine. But because of these disparities happening every single day, I don't want anybody else incarcerated another day. I don't want anybody denied healthcare another day. We need interventions now. Our school systems are poor. We continuously, even as Democrats in the Democratic Party, we hear, oh, you must send your child to this type of school, knowing it's a poor school. We need interventions now. I don't want to see anybody else die. We have opportunities. We know that Black people have been here to help people regardless of what anybody's background has been. When we look at what just happened yesterday with the things that our new president signed, Black people once again are left out. I'm tired of getting crumbs, but I'm tired of getting crumbs because people deserve to give us equity. We deserve it. When we go as Black people, we go to get a car loan, a mortgage. We are charged higher rates than other people. When we apply for jobs, people don't always hire us, or we're the first ones fired. If you have one Black person there, they might not hire another one. And I've been there when people have made comments like that too. And I'm very outspoken about it. Our Democratic Party, I know how sometimes they treat us too, but I won't touch too much on that unless you want me to, because I'm very unapologetic about it, because people are dying. So we need interventions now, short term and long term. That's fine if they want to do additional surveys, but we need interventions now so we could show Black excellence and build generational wealth.
So in another lifetime, I used to spend a lot of time at a community actors theater, and like my favorite handyman at the community actors theater used to always say, "Talk, talk, talk. When do we eat?" And I know that he got that quote from somewhere. I can't cite the source because I always heard it from him. And so here we are. Yes, people want to do more studies, and the reality is the data's there, research is there. There are some people who say, well, reparations, what is it really? Like, why do we think it is even something to consider?
It's something to consider because let me just give you specific facts about my family, if I may. Okay, so on my mother's side, my family, they're from down south. Well, both sides, they're from down south. Right after slavery, we got acres and mule.
Mm-hmm.
But yet some people got that and some people were killed because they had property and some other community members didn't have it. Okay, so that led to an issue of, well, the Black people have it, some others who aren't Black have property or don't have property. We want to take it. Okay, you had people in my family who were charged higher rates. It's still going on today. This leads to more disparities in building generational wealth. Again, I don't want anything extra. I just want us to have equitable playing field. It would be great if it was equal, but in order to have equality, we have to have equity, because you can't have a group of people who have a 155-year head start and expect others to catch up and meet them at the same place. You might get one or two, but that's where we get a couple tokens that excel, but the rest of us are suffering. And so it's important for us to have an intervention to address economic opportunities where we're not starting businesses and all of a sudden they burn down the town like we saw with Black Wall Street. So when we try to do the right thing, somebody tries to knock us down. When we try to run for office, somebody knocks us down. When we try to get good grades, somebody wants to put us in a special education class. So we constantly try to do the right things, but there are systems in place such as these poor educational systems that lead to a pipeline to prison. You stop slavery, but you just transform it into the industrial complex with the correctional facility. So I'm not stupid. I'm a critical thinker. But some people, you know, my grandmother, unfortunately, I'm not the type of Christian she was that turned the other cheek, you know, love thy neighbor as thyself. If I know you're doing wrong, I'm gonna call you out for doing wrong. And we need to be able to say enough is enough. And this is why I appreciate this group so much, because they're taking a bold opportunity to say enough is enough. We see there's disparities. We want to address them now. Nobody should have to live like this. And I'll stop there.
Just to and thank you for the personal, you know, application. That's, you know, that brings it to life and it makes it more personal to individuals, and multiply that with millions. You know, the first is just identify reparations. What is reparations? Reparations is anything done to repair the harm that, you know, for a wrong. You know, it can be money, it can be equipment, it can be a variety of things in terms of what reparations is. Oftentimes, even in when you mentioned, Kenya, you mentioned the church, you know, oftentimes they call it restitution. And the reason why I say that is because some of you may be familiar with James Foreman, who was very involved in the reparations movement back in the day. And so there was a reparations process that came from the white churches, and they were getting ready to pay an installment of $500 million, you know, as that first installment. You know, that was in the early mid 60s, you know, when that took place. And so oftentimes some of the language, but the process is the same, to repair, you know, the damage, the harm, for things that we've lost. So not only means, it's almost like repair for the breach of the war that you committed against someone wrongly. And so just think about it this way: we had the transatlantic slave, you know, trade, chattel slavery. Oftentimes we refer to it as the Holocaust. I know that there's another group that mentions the Holocaust, but this is also what we speak. The Ma'afa, exactly. There you go. Yes, you got there before I did. Thank you. Okay, and so we have to look at these things and say this is for the murders, for the rapes, for the torture. You know, and the total removal of any human rights, you know, that we were stripped of as humans. This whole process of chattel slavery was a real thing that America really did. But what's so interesting is that Kenya was just mentioning is that, yeah, it just shifted. You know, the process and slavery was supposed to have been over, you know, so it was for 246 years, and then continued, you know, Jim Crow, black codes, you know, all of the things that we had to deal with, which, you know, so the lynchings kept going, the murders kept going. You want me to stop, Lawana? Look, I saw. I saw your hand. I didn't know what I was supposed to stop. So here we are in 2021, and it's not done. It still continues, as Kenya was saying. We're still having the same kinds of outcomes, and everything that she spoke about. There's the main areas that we have to function under. So with the ma'afa that we experienced, and I say we because it was my ancestors, it's my people, my bloodline. Okay, and so and that's just for me, it continues on today. So you have to correct the wrong. Okay, I just, if I may give an analogy, if you don't mind, because I really think about, and I'm like Kenya, I'm a mental health professional as well. I see a couple of other people who are also mental health professionals. We feel as though that this has been an ongoing traumatic experience. This has been trauma, generational trauma. I think someone else mentioned it earlier before. So it is still, so even the babies we have today are still going to be experiencing this generational trauma. And so that has to be confronted holistically. Holistically, the holistic person, the spiritual person, your mental, emotional, physical individual. So that correction, you have to acknowledge it. So reparations is also acknowledging it is an apology. And America has had this, and I'm gonna use my language, feeble attempt at apologetic language. And I'm gonna leave it there. A lot of this stuff you can go look up, because we're not going to be able to get to everything. Because with reparations, there's too many moving parts. I'll put it that way. But that's why. That's part of why we, that we are entitled to. It is a demand, and we have been studied for years. We as a people. But this whole thing about paying reparations has, and I'll end it up this way, if you don't mind, just a little bit more, Lawana. Is that okay?
No, you're fine.
Okay. So when we think about this, for reparations, after the Uncivil War, General Sherman made a field article 15 to where Lincoln gave him the go-ahead for reparations. Now, what was that? What was the detail for that? The detail was that freed slaves were supposed to have been given the lands from the North Carolina down to Florida, and the coast and the coastal islands, 30 miles inland. And they were supposed to receive livestock and provisions. And this is where we get to the whole 40 acres and a lot of people.
No, go ahead.
I see your gestures. I don't know if I'm saying too much or whatever.
Go ahead. I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. So it was for livestock, and that livestock did include mules. But the reason why it was focused on mules and 40 acres was because people weren't supposed to receive less than 40 acres. But the mules were important. Why not? Because the army, the Sherman's army had an abundance of mules left over. And so they was giving them to these free slaves as well as other livestock. Okay, I just want us to understand that. But one thing they also, recognized that it was supposed to be, they were supposed to be receiving protection until they can do for themselves as well. Okay, and Sherman was asked by Reverend Frazier back in a minister at that time, what do you want? See, that's the key factor at that time. So white folks knew, they knew, like Kenya said, it's like, this ain't no secret. If you see the chats, you see, people know. So we don't have to play this game, So Reverend Frazier, was asked, and he identified very clearly that they didn't want nothing to do with, that system in which they were tortured. And so this is where a lot of people don't understand the depth of what reparations, was being offered. Unfortunately, when Lincoln was killed, what did his replacement do? Was Johnson? rescinded it, and gave that land back to those Confederates. Is what he wound up doing, the traitors. And so it's just, and so where did that leave? Where did that leave? You know, folks that at that time with zero. And that's when they became sharecroppers. Rather than working their own land, they were forced into sharecropping. So you see, the Ma'afa continues in so many different ways, and people don't want to talk about this because you are complicit. That's how America became wealthy, through this free. That's the only way, and passed down through generations. So a young man was on here earlier talking about generational wealth. Well, how in the world do white folks think that they got generational wealth in the first place? Come on now. And so the churches were complicit, insurance companies were complicit, corporations were complicit, politicians were complicit, you know, and then folks who close their eyes as long as they weren't us are complicit. And so it's the same thing today. If you close your eyes, as far as I'm concerned, you're still complicit. If you're not engaged in freeing the people, that's pursuing their sense of liberation as they define for themselves, then you're still complicit. You know, so the barriers we can make up. I wasn't there. I wasn't there either. And okay, so what's that got to do with it? Okay, so I'm just saying. I'll shut up. I'll be quiet just a second. I just wanted to just lay that foundational piece together, so we would have been owning from North Carolina down to Florida and all the islands off the coast. You know, so I mean, there's a lot of things there's a lot of pieces, and like I said, we're not going to get to everything, but I'm just trying to hurry up and jump in and get this stuff out of the way now as we move forward. So that I'll stop there. That's why reparations, you know, is due. It's time to pay the debt. And the last statement, Marcus Garvey said, all the wealth that the white man owns today would never be enough to make this make this wrong right.
Kahalifah, you said something interesting regarding sharecroppers. Now, in the 40s, well, actually the 30s, 20s, my family, they were sharecroppers. But the government got creative and got a lot of Black men to join the military.
Yep.
So then, who was there to tend to the land? So a lot of Black people had to sell their land. They were told if they move out west, they would have a better life. They sold the land for pennies. The women didn't know what to do. Sometimes the husbands, the brothers, the fathers, they died in combat. But people moved out west, and guess who had the land? And guess who didn't have money? So that whole sharecropper thing was just another way to take advantage of Black people who were doing great. People used to pass the towns in Arkansas, go to my family because they could feed people. But people of other races got mad. They didn't like that. They wanted that land. The same thing keeps happening now when we have successful business owners. Somebody tried to figure out a way to sue them, take them down. You know, man can't buy a TV network. Things happen, right? So, okay. But it's just the same playbook playing over and over again. And like I said, all we want is equal playing field.
All right, so before we go any further, we do have a question from the audience. Starla Lewis, I try not to like gush whenever I introduce her or ask her a question, but so much of who I am in terms of how I present to all of you was influenced by her guidance when I had her as an instructor. She helped me learn how to engage in the learning and the knowledge in a different way.
Hey, Starla.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here, and especially with the topic. One of the things that I'm seeing over and over again is our positions are based on our miseducation. And so much of what will help us pick a side or become a part of the movement is really a deeper understanding of education. And I always think of one of my favorite people in history, and that's Frederick Douglass. And when slavery, quote unquote, ended, he said, "You must be forever vigilant, for slavery can take on yet another name." And because we haven't analyzed slavery, even Black people haven't truly analyzed slavery because it's painful and it's hard to look at. But the reality is slavery was never abolished in the Constitution of the United States.
Mm-mm.
It says slavery is abolished in these here United States, except in the case of persons convicted of a crime. So our criminal justice system is just an extension of our slave system.
Yes.
You know, and that we have slave catchers who round up young people, slave catchers who take them to the holding pen or the county jail, slave catchers who place them on the auction block or in the courtroom, slave catchers who then sentence them to long periods of time to work for relatively free in a prison industrial complex. We haven't looked at that whole system and how it manifests and which peoples it impacts the most. And so I think that's a very, very important of history that we haven't looked at. The other piece is that we haven't looked at all the things that have happened after quote unquote slavery emancipated. And that means we haven't looked at the fact that how did Black people become economically disadvantaged in a society with quote unquote opportunities? But when we look at the history, we see, for example, after we served in the military and came back from the war and the powers that be decided to invent a middle class, because before that, there was just the rich and the poor. And so the middle class was invented to create consumers so that the rich could get richer. But the consumers that were first created were all white people. Why? Because our economic base is around owning land, owning homes, etc. And so they only gave, what do I want to call them? It's the, help me here, those in the military, you get to be able to buy a house, what's it called?
It's the Montgomery GI Bill.
The GI Bill, that's what I'm looking for. The GI Bill was only given to white soldiers. So Latinos and Asians and Africans, people of African descent, they weren't allowed those GI Bill mortgages. And so what happened is over those decades, the white middle class was created. And it was created in such a way that now when we look at it, we think, oh, well, they just had more economic savvy or something, when in reality, their ancestors were given at least a couple of, maybe even 3 decades head start in being able to build and maintain wealth. And then when we look fast forward today, even in San Diego, when you look at home ownership, it's harder to get a loan. They're still redlining. They don't call it redlining. You'll just never see the house that's there and existed, you know. And I want to end with this, but I'm part of a family that integrated Altadena, California. And I know that the only reason we were able to get this house in Altadena was because they thought my father was a white man. They thought he was Italian. And when my mother and I showed up, they went, oh my God, they're Negroes. But the civil rights movement was happening. And they said, well, things are changing, so let's give these Negroes a chance. And so in my lifetime, I have vivid memory of redlining and desegregating. And my school, which was a very multi-ethnic school, it's famous. They actually have a documentary about my school because so many different ethnic groups lived and went there, but they also all got along. We had a very peaceful interaction and very supportive interaction. But when I look at the documentary of my school, the redlining is very real because one of the Asian students is asking her mother, why did we choose to live in this neighborhood? And her mother said, are you crazy? We didn't have a choice. These are the only neighborhoods we could live in. Or when I remember the janitor at my school, a wonderful man who I didn't realize at the time was an Olympic gold medal track star from the Berlin Olympics. And so even though these people did great things, they're relegated to positions that didn't allow them to live the life that was equal to their genius and their talents. So that's why reparations is so important. And we had a collective experience. So I personally believe we need a collective reparation, that it's not individual, that it's something that uplifts everybody.
Yeah.
A lot of really important things have been touched in, and I just want to fill in some of the blanks because when you talk about wealth being attached to land ownership, and the fact that part of the original reparations act included land, let's not forget that giving away land had already been happening in this country in the 18th century, so the 1700s, when it was illegal for Black people to even read. um, White families were being given free land if they just go settle on the land. And so by the time slavery was abolished, the idea of land could have made, it could have done something to help equalize or stabilize, even though that land had already been helping to build generational wealth for people who were not in bondage. And I think it's important to fill in those blanks because it is not a handout. When the flyer art was first sent to me, it was too late to change it. And it showed the picture of the 40 acres and the mule and the hands out. I responded with an alternative image, which was a check marked insufficient funds. Because the reality is, in the same way today, if anyone on this call worked for someone and they didn't get paid or they didn't get fair wages, they could get some form of redress in the form of back payment. Um, Reparations doesn't even come close in any form that it's been presented to being equal to or even nearly equivalent to the value of all of the free labor. And that's not even when you factor in pain and suffering. And then the other part, you talk about generational trauma. There's research that has been done, and the research was actually done with veterans who came back from combat. But they found that the trauma, the post-traumatic stress syndrome, the trauma impacted them in a physical way that changed their DNA. And not only did it change their DNA, it changed the DNA of their children.
Yeah. Yeah, let me. That's an excellent point, and I think that's something else to When I spoke about holistic, that's when I mentioned part of that development. I use this as an analogy. So let's just say that you find this beautiful plant in another country, and it has a beautiful fragrance and different look, and you just got to have that. And so you take that plant and you take it to your homeland and transplant it into your soil. It's no longer in its own rooted soil. After a while, what winds up happening, it adapts to that environment, that new environment, and it no longer smells the same. It may not no longer look the same. Yet the generalized DNA is still there, but the outcome of it is still different. And so part of what you're speaking to, Lawana, is what I'm looking at is that, yes, there's even been discussions and maybe controversial to some, but I'm gonna get it out there anyway, y'all, okay? Is that generation after generation, and we have changed our bodies and stuff. It changed us when at the time that male and that female, they both have experienced this trauma generation after generation. It is in their DNA now, as one would identify. This is part of that argument they had. And so when conception takes place, that child is also being conceived through a physical differential. That's not the same. And so we wonder, well, what happens, what's happening to us with this whole generational process and how we respond and react to certain things. And I'm just saying that the environmental processes that we have to endure holistically, because even Christianity was used against us as and it was a double-edged sword, y'all. Because I'm a believer myself, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword. It shackled us and it saved us at the same time. We can see that as evidence right now. So I'm just saying, that's nothing against anybody or any particular religion, but I'm saying for us, we have to take a look at the whole environmental structure because we were stolen. We were taken like that beautiful plant out of its rich soil and placed into a foreign soil that is contrary to its natural development. So therefore we come out looking and smelling different than what we originally, originally really are. And so, I just wanted to throw that out as an analogy to address what Lawana is identifying, as that, from that physical, aspect, not to mention all the other things that's comprehensive in our overall development. So we have not, since the 1619, we have not developed in our natural process at all. It's been altered. And so when we see that, it manifests itself in so many ways that we'll never get to in this conversation. Starter mentioned that, mentioned a lot of things. A young man that came on earlier. So I'm just saying, if we step back and we look at the wide screen and we look at the background and the foreground at the same time about what is, and then we like started saying, I'm an educator. I teach too. So knowledge about, and especially about this, is critical. And maybe maybe down the road, Lawana will get to the point, because I had some serious experiences, back in the late 80s, early 90s, as bringing some awareness about reparations at that time, and maybe we'll get to that, maybe we won't. But I had some serious experiences about exposing San Diego to reparations in the late 80s and early 90s.
So Kahalifah, we're going to get to that. But we do have a question or comment from the audience. I have to say, I'm really glad that we've got people who are engaging, because I really prefer dialogues and meetings to talking head environments. Darwin Fishman, you're on.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Sorry I'm late. I see a lot of names I recognize, so that's really impressive. That's very good to see. And I worked on reparations for about 30 years, mostly on the East Coast with NCOBRA, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And I hadn't found anything like that in San Diego, like a chapter here. So it's really good to see this. And I'm really glad that Dr. Weber has helped to really get this going, especially statewide. So I'm really curious to hear, I'll share the link for NCOBRA, and I'm curious to see like how we want to connect or interact with these other groups in the national infrastructure. And I'll always remember Minister, all the speakers that came to the national NCOBRA event in DC. So, and that there's also a lot of resources that are available for us too, if we want to tap into that. There's a lot of great folks that are working on this issue all over the place. So thank you for putting this together, and I'm excited about being able to connect with all of you and work on this.
All right, well, thank you for your contribution. I want to start by introducing you to Kahalifah King. He was the founding president for the San Diego chapter of NCOBRA. And just as as he was wrapping up, when he said he wanted to talk about some of his experiences, he was referencing what it was like for him in the 80s when he was really deep into this work. And so, Kahalifah, I know you got a lot to say, but I haven't heard from Kenya, and I want to hear from her before her mic stops working again.
I switched computers. No excuse. But what might be helpful is to hear from Kahalifah regarding that history in San Diego, because he's been working in San Diego addressing these issues for decades. My family back in the day, they were part of the Black Federation, the US organization. That's what I knew. Okay. Even though I'm out here in the East County, my roots come from Lincoln High School.
I'm just teasing.
My cousin got Swahili names. I just got Kenya. Okay. But no, this is really important, because the history will repeat itself if we let it. And at this time, I'd like to defer to him because we had a great conversation earlier too. And the history is very important because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel when we have some things in place that are working. Let's build on them. But also, San Diego has a unique culture that might be different than some of my family that are experiencing in Florida or Alabama or Arizona. Because in San Diego, what I find sometimes when we look at issues of systemic racism, people might look in your face and smile, but do something else when we turn our back. Now, my family down south, a lot of times, you know who likes you and who doesn't. So, Mr. King, please.
Yeah, I feel a little bit on the spot, but okay, I'll do the best I can. You know, at where I'm at, the memory, you know, kind of fades sometimes. So that's my disclaimer up front. First of all, I just want to acknowledge Darwin. Thank you, brother, for putting up the information and sharing some things around that. Yes, and I've been to several NCOBRA conferences. Detroit, Baton Rouge, DC. So you and I, you know, travel some of the same pathways, my brother. So thank you so much. And I will say, yes, no, there was a chapter here in San Diego that I had started, and Kenya alluded to some things. And back in the day, you know, if you remember, Darwin, you can probably support me on this if you probably remember that. You know, back in the day, that's when it was kind of new to everybody, and in terms of really getting the information out there, like. Lawana said, I was going around passing buttons. Oh, by the way, I got a box full of reparation buttons. I still got reparation buttons. Okay, I'm just letting y'all know. Okay, a box full of them. And we had, you know, we were doing surveys. We did our surveys with ourselves. It was internal to understand to know what people knew and understood about reparations. What were some of their thoughts and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, and I'll just, not trying to get any sympathy, but I just remember being in that position and the death threats that I got, for working in this in the late 80s, early 90s and such, and all the work that the National Black Lawyers Association, if people understand how in COBRA, the National Lawyers Association, they were, strongly connected and filing lawsuits. Sister Atawa, that's her name, Brother Darwin. Oh Lord, the attorney, but she was the lead attorney. But anyway, I'm gonna move forward. And here, San Diego, people were looking for their check, but that's about it. We did not pursue, we did not support. I remember going to San Diego State. Lawana had invited me to speak there at San Diego State to the BSUs, and we were going around to ASUs and BSUs trying to, really educate the students in terms of what it meant to them, even from an educational standpoint, because someone had mentioned in the chat that the education is also part of the pathway to this, to the economic, successes. And I just thought about where we were, and you think about now, how do we really get folks to understand the importance, the need, and what I found out being in San Diego with the chapter, it seemed like a lot of folks were embarrassed to really embrace or work towards reparations. Here we did plan and have and it wasn't as successful as we wish it could have been, a reparations conference here as well. The Pan-African Association was very strong here. As a matter of fact, there was a conversation I had with the then president, won't mention names, but the NAACP, and it was in their constitution to support reparations and to fight for reparations, but there was nothing going on there. So I'm just saying, I'm not trying to put anything down. I'm saying where's this common denominator for us to understand the priorities that not only help us from the past and the present, but also sustains us for the future. And so some of those challenges were very, kind of heartbreaking, but it didn't stop me, but the problem is that the chapter was so I believe that we started out pretty decently, but when the work came to really get out there and put some stuff on the line, especially if folks are threatening you, everybody can't handle that. Everybody can't handle that threat of their life, y'all. You know, for leaders who are in the forefront doing those kinds of things as well. Nothing against anybody. I'm just saying what we have to do is look at this. I think Starter had mentioned the different ways of educating people in a way that hopefully what we can do is not only touch their minds, but we can touch their hearts as what reparations means, because what we're doing is really fighting for our ancestry who gave their lives for the pathways that we follow. We stand on their shoulders. Do we not owe something to our ancestors for what they endured? Not only coming across the Middle Passage, but those that survived. And we're talking about hundreds of millions of people. We're not talking about a few million. And it's continuing. And who else said this? Somebody else just said this. And they're still shooting us down in the street, today. Anyway, and so here in San Diego, it's just a matter of, do we have and I'm gonna use this, it's a very small word, but it's very powerful. Do we truly have the will to pursue and secure reparations? And the last thing I'm gonna say is that I'm glad to see what the video you showed about Oregon, and I'm not gonna ask any questions about, because I forgot, because I had my mind just running real fast. Of what they're doing in Oregon and what Shirley had put in, Dr. Weber had put in for California. Some of us on the more national level, and I need to reinstate myself with NCOBRA as well, because I've been away for a bit. But I just don't, this is a national issue, and I'm praying that Oregon, California, or any other states, that this is all being fashioned after HR 40 that John Conyers really introduced the first time back in the day, and Sheila Jackson Lee just recently reintroduced HR 40 as well. That is the process that they're working towards. So if states do something, my concern is that it does not detract from the national movement that encompasses much more. And I think that's because California was a free state, even though it allowed certain things to take place with slaves, and I'm not minimizing that at all. That's why Shirley's bill is so important. And if you've read it, and if you and Starter, I'm go back to this again, sister girl, is there's so much information out here, y'all. Everybody get on Google and Facebook for everything else. There's all kinds of information out here, and it's going to inundate you. But you pick the things that that's going to work with you, and share that with other people and see where they're at. So you can't get nothing done if you do not do that part and share that information with other people. It's just that simple.
Brother Kahalifah, I love to get started, and you cover a lot of ground. But we have 3 people that have their hands up. They want to have questions. So I've brought Prince to the front because he was the first one to raise his hand. So young man, if you could unmute your mic and make your comment or ask your question.
Can you come back to me actually, please? I'm just taking some notes right now. Thank you. Can you go me last? I'm just taking a couple notes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So then Samantha. Let's see here.
Thank you for recognizing me. I wanted to ask a question. As we discuss the topic of reparations, whether at the state level or potentially at the national level, I wanted to ask if anyone thought that part of the reason why this subject hasn't moving forward in any constructive fashion is maybe a lack of unified policy prescription around the subject, in the sense where maybe if we had a standardized set of requests that we wanted specific to reparations, then we could have very specific conversations and then create some policy prescriptions in that focus.
I'll just say real quick, the survey, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kenya, ladies first, go ahead.
Okay. I appreciate that question, Samantha, and all the work that you do as well in our communities. When I was growing up in various churches in the community, now I have tons of family here, that moved out here since the 40s, generations. But people didn't want to draw too much negative attention to the family. Because back down south, you know, sometimes people got killed when you drew too much attention to the family. Speed it up to 2019, 2020. When you speak too much regarding injustices, all of a sudden you have people sitting outside your house, people following you. It still happens. But one of the things when I heard a lot of talk here in San Diego, it was the American descendants of slaves talking more and more about reparations. One of the questions that I first asked was, what are we asking for? What specific thing? And it was very general at first. We have different needs, but the bottom line is we want to make sure we're able to build that generational wealth. We have great school systems. We have equal access to healthcare. We stop this pipeline to prison. That's a commonality. But one of the questions is, who's going to take the lead? We have a lot of groups doing the same thing, but sometimes something doesn't always get done. I think in the last year, we are in a new place in America, not just with the strength and mobilization of Black people, but with our allies too. We're not settling for crumbs anymore. We could go on and on of what should have happened, what could have happened, what didn't happen. But at the same time, we are looking forward to getting reparations because we deserve it. Everybody else received something. How come we're not? Now, I'm not willing to settle for mediocrity. I'm willing to step up, step out, and talk about these things openly. And I know a number of you are too, but we need to have that specific ask. Now, from a academia perspective, sometimes people want the updated research, right? I get that. But at the same time, what are we going to do when that family goes to the Family Resource Center and they need services and you're saying, well, I could give you services if that man's not in the home? We need policy changes now. But yet, you know, some families come in from other countries and they're able to have multiple people, the mother and the father, in their home. So we need federal changes, but we also need local policies that are hiring Black people, are not turning Black people down for grants. I see too many of you that have extremely powerful, productive, efficient programs in the community where you're volunteering your time. You should be getting hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to fund your programs, but yet people get funded that might reach out to 150 people a year. That's unacceptable. So it's time for us to stop settling for crumbs and make sure that the same way we are getting people elected, we support those that are going to support us. But going forward, we can no longer support people who are doing nothing for us, but making money off of us.
You know, if I can just jump in real quick, Samantha, to address that. In the early days within COBRA, that's what it was doing. That's what we were trying to do, was develop the policy by reaching out to the community and getting the community's input rather than a group of people making a decision to create the policy themselves. Because, you know, we always question, well, who did this or why are they doing it? So we went out to the communities with the questionnaires or surveys, if you will. And we compiled all that information, you know, to determine how we wanted to do that. And that's why and with part of that policy from the legal standpoint, the Black Lawyers Association, National Black Lawyers Association, was doing that arm of it. And then, you know, they were also connected within COBRA, and within COBRA, we were also doing a lot of the other overall grassroots and, you know, and programmatic processes as well. So those things were the things that we were engaged in at that particular point in time, you know. And I'm sure that, I don't know if whoever else is next, I know Darwin, he was involved within COBRA, or is involved within COBRA as well. So I just want to answer that very quickly, you know, to respond to that very quickly about the policies and what we're looking at and so on and so forth, because we needed our input, you know, at that grassroots level as well.
And also, I just want to thank, I saw Tasha in the chat, and Darwin had, Dr. Fishman had spoke as well. I appreciate all the documentation of what they're doing, because a lot of people have said, oh, this stuff doesn't exist. But sometimes, even if you show somebody a tape, they're still saying, oh, well, it didn't happen that way. But I think now, because people continuously keep seeing these injustices, they're starting to either get silent and say, we have a problem, or some people are actually acting and wanting to help support us. But we have to keep in mind that with Prop 16, that people who said they were for us, everybody didn't vote in favor of that. So we definitely have some work to do, but definitely I'm happy that there's so many people on this call here today so we could get this moving in a positive direction and get results.
Yeah, I had an opportunity today to participate and observe the reinvestment task force meeting, and asking the questions how, regarding people who are homeowners in communities that were previously redlined in years past, and still live under the impact of a lack of equity and development in a proportionate rate to that of other communities, and how we can start seeing some tangible outcomes from these federalized programs that don't align with any real impact in the local community. And so it's a challenge, but I think this is one of the things where when we look at how we develop a policy prescription for how reparations could manifest, that would be one of the things, looking at, banking, property values, and all of these kinds of things that, still impact our communities today.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
I want to go to Starla. She's had her hand up for quite some time. I brought her up to the spotlight because she was going to be the next person to speak.
So I want to go back to the question about how do we get people, on the same page, figuring out what to do with this reparations. And I truly believe that it's about educating the people, but first educating ourselves. We have a lot of leaders who don't know their own history. And so with the best of intentions, they pick a path that leads us to destruction. We've spent so much time, for example, busing our kids to get them in quote unquote good schools, but the curriculum is the same curriculum. That is a curriculum of the lack of self-knowledge, which means that the students, even when they have straight A's, I remember one of my daughters said, I don't understand why you want me to get an A in myths, lies, and stereotypes. And so our challenge is to say, we want that money to be able to educate us and the communities that we interact with. People were so angry at Donald Trump when Donald Trump is the perfect example of the educational system. He believed the narrative. And the narrative says what? That this is a white man's country built by white men for white men, not even women.
That's right.
And so when we see the things that he would say and do and be offended, he was just speaking the narrative that his educational system had taught him and has taught most of us. And so in our minds, we have to say, what do I need to replace that narrative with? The answer is simple, it's truth. This is a very diverse nation. It's always been diverse, and we don't learn about it diversely, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really have to educate the people so that when they do get reparations, they'll know what to do with the reparations from a knowledge base, not just an emotional base.
Starla, you mentioned that, and that was one of the things that in Cobra where we were passing and thinking about in terms of certain things that people would need to engage in prior to even receiving any type of reparational process, as to be educated. And that and in different, and one of those things was not only about our history, like you're mentioning too, but also about the political process here in this country and how it works, with us as well as finance and some other things that were being shared about. I like the language being educated about us and what we need to do in order to be successful as we determine for ourselves.
Well, about us and each other, there's a book that I've been looking at called The Birth of White Supremacy, The Birth of a White Nation. That's what it's called. And basically, the woman is breaking down the history of when white people were invented, because we didn't used to be all these different kinds of people. And so, and it was like around the 1600s, late 1600s.
Right,
And
right.
so when we understand something that simple, and then when our allies can learn enough of their own history and our history to understand why it's in their best interest that we get reparations, how it helps their slate, if you will, when we get reparations.
Absolutely.
Because so many people say, well, I wasn't there back then, and why should I be responsible for what happened back then? But are you benefiting from what happened back then? That's the first question. And then the larger statement is, the people who created this system of white supremacy been dead. They've been gone. So how does it maintain itself? We buy into it, you know, and that's how we can understand that when we learn something different, we can do something different.
Right.
I don't believe we were born this way. So it's a thought form, and it's a thought form that we can change with new knowledge and new information. It's a choice.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I remember you teaching me that knowledge itself is like critical, because if someone else knows more about you than you know about yourself, then they can control you.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to bring Prince back because I think he's going to ask a question now, unless he got unready again. Are you ready? All right.
Yeah. So I have a couple of things. Lawana, thank you. More of a comment, because I want to piggyback on some stuff. Lawana, thank you very much for coordinating this. Kenya, for your powerful testimony. Starla, you are on fire, and we love you. And I know you retired and then came back, but we do not want you to retire again. You always demonstrate how much you are needed, and I hope you got a successor, please, because if you say you're retiring again and you ain't got nobody coming behind you, then that's a problem for us. Kahalifah, I love you. You've been in my life for a long time. I want a button. Also, too, I wanted to add on to what you said about this is not only for our ancestors, but this is for our children and our grandchildren and the children, the Black children that are yet to come. Reparations is a matter of life and death for Black Americans. I don't know if anybody knows about the study by the Institute for Policy Studies that show that the wealth for the median Black family will go down to zero in 2053. So this is as big as it comes. So, and also to Kahalifah, I wanted to thank you. I wanted to formally thank you from the Black community. Thank you for your service. I think a lot of times people that do this work, and because of anti-Blackness and because of our position in this system, that we don't get to the recognition that we deserve. And I just wanted to take this second to recognize you, because you are all of that, and you are wonderful, and you took those death threats. And I don't think enough people know about your story. And if we don't elevate stories like his, they're not going to know your story, and my story is not going to be valuable, and what Starla is giving is not going to be valuable. And I think that piggybacks into Samantha's question about why this isn't a bigger issue, because we actually have to elevate ourselves, because we talk about nobody's going to help us, nobody's going to think about us, we're not getting reparations. Instead of taking that pessimism, we can lift each other up. This summer was a particularly great moment as people everywhere was talking about racism, and it became really in vogue. And we need to kind of piggyback onto that momentum and make sure that we can then put reparations in the forefront as BLM turned into like Trans Lives Matter and DACA. We see different groups piggybacking, using our pain, our history, our trauma to then make a case so they can get benefits. Also, one part was there's a lot of genealogists in San Diego that can actually speak on how easy it is to trace your family back. I've traced my family very easily through the DNA ancestry, 150 years without major without a lot of work. And it's going to be a little bit of work going past 150 years, but it's very doable. So I don't think it's as hard based on, I've talked to Yvette Porter Moore. She's a local genealogist. And there's a genealogist in LA that it's not that hard. She knows it's not that hard. Also, too, we have a reparation. We did, I work with an organization called Buy Black San Diego, and I'm familiar with a lot of people in the room. And we did a reparations event in March of 2020. And we actually have a bigger event coming up soon in March and February with Ta-Nehisi Coates and another economist that deals with lineage and generational wealth. So that's coming up. You can also follow Buy Black San Diego just by looking us up on Facebook and just getting on our email list. We'll let you know. Let me address Samantha. There's a lot. Samantha, I think that, and this is to everybody, I think Black people, because we are the fathers and mothers of civilization, we have been selfless in some ways and also putting ourselves last. So when we advocate, so I've advocated for reparations and a Black agenda, some of it through ADOS 101. So there are people out there with ideas and with stuff that can work, but we need to become self-interested. Whereas we're nothing against these other groups and nothing against their needs, but we have been here for 400 years and we haven't got what we needed yet. So sometimes it's frustrating for me when I see a lot of Black people, they're parroting what's the trends that are in vogue. Like we talk about the kids in cages and we talk about what's big right now, kids in cages, Trump, like everybody was about Trump. Instead of talking about our issues, we've now, because we've been here and we've been following and learning from, like Starla said, we're getting an education from these people, so we're taking on their traits. So instead of being self-interested, we're following after the trends in white supremacists in this country. We're following after these trends. So I think we need to get back to being self-interested. We need to, instead of always worrying about other people, we need to talk about reparations, and we need to do it together and make sure it's something that everybody's talking about, not just people, not just Kahalifah, not just once in a while, not just because of another Black person dies. We need to have, Yvette Carnell calls it a steady drumbeat. We need to be steady drum beating and always talking about it, not saying it because it's popular, because other people think it's popular and it's okay. We need to, amongst ourselves, talk about reparations and Black issues and Black items and make them important, because as you know, everybody follows us anyways. We just have to believe in ourselves in that aspect and start to talk about reparations and talk about reparations. When somebody talks about other stuff, say throw reparations in there. I always throw reparations in there. Yes, that's enough for now. Sorry about that. Thank you guys for listening.
Okay, so I have in the chat a comment from Shirley Golub asking how media impacts this topic. And, most of our decisions and our actions are influenced by the messaging that we're inundated with, and it shapes our view. Earlier, there were some comments about how people go to school to learn more about the myths and legends that reinforce white supremacy. When I ran for school board, one of the things on my platform was the decolonization of education so that we can start to move into a different place. Kelly King has had her hand up for a while, and I've not been ignoring you. I've just been trying to be sequential and get everybody in. So please, Prince, thank you for everything you had to say. I appreciate you as a human being, and I'm glad you contributed your voice to this space. And so I'm going to take you off the stage, and I'm going to add Kelly King for a moment. And Kelly King, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. I only wanted to come in whatever order you have. I did not.
Okay.
I just raised my hand so I would be in the stack. The thing I am thinking about with regard to generational wealth, in the 2008 downturn, there was lots of evidence that Black people had lost 50% of the wealth that they had accumulated since slavery. And the reason why they were so devastated economically relative to white people is because of the California legislation and the federal legislation of racist housing policies. So that you can talk about it going back to the Civil War and before, obviously 1619, right? But you can also talk about it in pretty near terms, that in the 50s, Black people couldn't buy a home. So when it came to a whole economic downturn that wiped out many people, Black and white, the Black people were 30 years behind just on that measure of accumulating generational wealth. In other words, they had less generational wealth because of racism than other people did. And I'm wondering if we can't look at that in terms of something near term, not 200 years ago, people saying, oh, well, I wasn't alive then, blah, 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 but something pretty near term, something pretty measurable. And also talk about, are we talking about reparations for slavery, or are we talking about reparations for racism? I'm just, bringing up the issue there. Okay.
Yes. So the conversation varies. I'm gonna let Kahalifah answer this because he gets asked this stuff. I've watched him answer it, but I just have to say, for me, Kelly, the answer is yes, all of the above, because I don't think it's about what trauma was the most egregious, because the reality is emotional abuse has its impact too, and quite often. Yeah. So I'm gonna turn it over. Go ahead, Kahalifah. And then I'm gonna go back to questions because our audience is getting really riled up. Unless you want to jump in, Kenya. Go ahead.
Let me just say real quick, trauma is trauma.
There you go. Yeah, and I'll just say you hit the nail. I don't have to spend a lot of time and let other people speak up and such. But yes, it covers all of that. It's past and it's present, and we're just not talking about. I heard the word racism. It's more than racism. And so so the idea is, like, I go back to what some of my other colleagues here that I'm familiar with, like Starla was saying, it's the education. And the more knowledge and information that you have, you'll understand, all of us will understand that it's more than just we're looking at racism. So I think we just, just give ourselves a chance to look at all these aspects. So yes, it's past and it's present, and we're looking at what the future, what that future is going to be. There's a whole lot of little different things. And I'll say this last piece as you're letting some people in. There has been so many documents and proposals or plans of action. The Abuja Proclamation that came out of Africa with the Pan-African Association. Ron Daniels' Black Community Development Plan, the National Black Lawyers Association, the Family Survival Plan, the Nation of Islam had the 3-year economic plan. So Marcus Garvey had a plan. The Ex-Slave Mutual Bodily Relief Fund also had a plan. So the reality is, well, I guess, just from my perspective, we don't have to go and reinvent a lot of new stuff. We can take what some of our ancestors and elders have already put together and bring those things forward, because one is on a local level here, yes. Then we have this whole national speak, and then we also have an international speak. And so that's what the Abaju proclamation was about. It was about the diaspora as well from a reparational standpoint. And so we have to look at all these particular, processes. And that's why I said there's a lot of moving parts to this, and I don't want us to get lost and bogged down. So that means, as was said earlier, that we all can once we get additional information, we can choose where we think we're going to be more effective, that touches our hearts and our minds, and get the work done, because there's a lot out there to do. There's a lot, and I'll just leave it there.
Dahlia, I know you got lots to say.
Hi. So I've just been listening. This has been great. So one thing that is on my mind is that I hope that, as you know, often we're, as Black people, are trying to create a more equitable environment for all of us. These distractions come in our way, right? These things that we then find ourselves like having to explain when we don't really need to. For example, the whole idea of lineage. I mean, really? I mean, unless your family, like, I'm from Haiti, and my family came here in 1970. So unless you're like Caribbean and you came to the US in the 1960s or late 60s or 70s, or most recently, like, Somalian, some Kenyan, Nigerian, African families. The overwhelming majority of African Americans in this country are descended through slavery or have been, you know what I mean? So the whole, well, how do we even prove this and that is a distraction to me, because it's like, please don't insult me again.
It is.
Really?
It
because
is.
our history is very clear, and we shouldn't have to explain something that is we should not be the ones to explain this. I get very frustrated when we as Black people have to explain things that are very clear, definitive, and accurate. And where do you think we came from? And so that's just one of my struggles, right, personally. And I want us to stop having to always provide excuses. Like when people ask us to show the research of why this is, well, you show me the research that doesn't show that, because the research, as we know, does support, the claims. Kenya, Kahalifah, how do you,
Kahalifah?
Right. I'm so sorry. I was just want to make sure I pronounced it.
Okay, I'm not offended. It's fine.
Lawana, I'm looking at everyone who's here, professionals, people, community members. The research is clear. So you prove to me that it's not clear, instead of me having to give you yet again more information. And I just wanted to say that.
Very good.
Thank you, Dahlia. You always make really strong points. So I got a couple of housekeeping bits. I had said I was going to do a bio break because I thought we would have a lull. We're almost at the end of our program. Samantha Jenkins has her hand up. I'm going to bring her to the stage to make her comment. And then last words, Kahalifah and Kenya. And I'll be turning it over to Dave. He's asked for me to get it back to him and leave him at least, 15 to 10 minutes to wrap up the meeting. So that's where we're at. So Samantha.
Okay, so that means we have about 5 minutes left. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Looking at the clock. Okay, thank you.
So Samantha, you could say what you needed to say.
Thank you. You know me, when I come into these things, I'm always trying to encourage members of our community, particularly our Black community, to find spaces in policy and government and legislation where that are relevant to the conversation at hand. And as I said, I had the opportunity to sit in on the city county reinvestment task force meeting today. And that's something I would really encourage people to do, because as we talk about the disparities, the systematic processes that have, taken away our opportunities for building wealth in our communities, we really do have to look at, banking practices. We have to look at housing policy. We know that currently the NAACP has a lawsuit that they are a part of the amicus brief in regarding the practices of the San Diego Housing Commission and their Section 8 allocations and voucher processes. And so there are a lot of things that we can do in a really constructive way that all tie into these issues of systematic racism, bias, and the economic impact on our community. So I would really encourage people to look at where they can get into those spaces. And if you want to talk to me at some point, I do know a good number of the people here in the room. We see each other and engage in things all the time. And I'd love to talk to people about how we can get more Black faces and more Black voices into the conversations that are asking the hard questions and creating accountability for systems that are already in place, because we have to know that these things are already in place to hold them accountable. The conversation happened today where it was essentially these banking institutions are doing the bare minimum to meet the federal standard of the Community Reinvestment Act. And they're doing that because they know that they can. We have to get to creating some updated policy that forces them to really take some more substantive action around their lending practices, around how they insure homeowners and such in low and middle income and minority communities, and how, disparate development of wealth results from these practices.
Very good.
So Samantha, thank you so much for adding to the conversation. Which one of you wants to do your closing
Ladies
remarks
first. Go ahead, Kenya. Ladies first. I've been talking so much, so I apologize.
Thank you so much again to Mike and David and Dr. Richmond for having me this evening. A lot of the discussion that I have in our communities deal with building generational wealth, economics, education, health disparities. Whether it's popular or not, if I'm the only one in a room, I will continue to address these issues. Incarceration. We need more people. We need to mobilize more to address these issues with those who are impacting policies. But also, when I was growing up, one of the best things that ever happened to me in the 70s, there was a building down on Euclid and Logan. It was the YWCA.
Yes.
Not the YMCA, it was the YWCA. Salada Salam and others, they taught me and my family, we were there every single weekend. They taught us about loving ourselves. That's why I don't accept mediocrity, because I know we come from kings and queens, and I'm not going to accept anything less than that. We need a collective effort within the Black community. I encourage, when there are discussions in any of our circles and they start talking about POC or BIPOC, we unapologetically talk about Black issues versus being lumped in with everybody else, because our Black issues are unique to everybody else. Many of you who are part of the Democratic Party, since this is a club, you have heard me say in front of our elected officials, if California is so blue, if San Diego is so blue, why do we have so many Black people in jail? Obviously, somebody's not for us. Of course, that didn't make me popular, but that's okay, because I don't want anybody else to die. Okay. And the people that go to the Central Committee, they've heard me say it. But my thing is, we must do better. Again, we just want a fair playing field. We always talk about transparency, accountability. We want to send our kids to the best schools too. When I have future grandkids, I want them to have opportunities. I already have 24-year-old Black male sons in East County that I have to fear something happening to them every single day. I want to make sure that we get what we deserve, because whether it's me or somebody else who's Black in our communities, we shouldn't get higher interest rates. We shouldn't go for the same job 2 and 3 times and turn down, and I have to wonder, are they just checking a box to say I interviewed somebody Black, but they were not a good fit, so we didn't hire them? Right now, we have the County of San Diego coming up with this racism is a public health issue, but now all of a sudden it's turning into, let's focus on COVID only. Yes, COVID is a problem. We are in a pandemic. Disproportionately, we have Black people on the streets at a higher rate. We want to make sure that we have results, solutions for success, bottom line. But it's important, if our allies who are on this call today, I invite you to reach out to me, Kahalifah, Dr. Richmond, anybody else who's on the line today, because one of the things our allies are saying, some of them are getting tired. We're fighting every day. We've been fighting for 9 months, 11 months, and nothing's getting better, right? The Black folks, we're going to keep fighting. We've been doing this forever. We have fortitude. But I just want you to know, I appreciate you. I might not say it enough, but this is a new day. We are not going to settle for crumbs anymore. We want accountability from all of the people that are in our circles. And I'm talking from a political lens, because that's what I do the most of right now. But we want to make sure we have results So we're not talking about this again for 402 years. Enough is enough. And like one of my best sheroes in the world, Shirley Chisholm, I'm unbought and unbossed. It's time that we have people making policies for us and business leaders in the community that are hiring us, because no longer can we do business like we've been doing. It's time for us to make sure that Black people are able to build generational wealth. So we're not asking anybody for a dime. We want to create the next Black Wall Street, and we need to be unapologetic about that, because we know us. We know our community. We are loved, but we need to make sure that people aren't standing in the way for us to be the best that we could be. So thank you again for having me. I appreciate all the work that everybody's doing, and I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Very good.
So you can tell Kenya is in politics.
I
Rhetorical
everything is political. Everything is political. And the reason I'm like this is because I don't want to see anybody else die. So I want us all to thrive.
So, Brother Kahalifah.
Yeah, I'll do this pretty quickly. First, I want to thank all of you. You know, the club itself, the Progressive Democratic of the Democrats of America. Thank you, Ferry Alley. Thank you so much. I appreciate just considering me to be part of this. I'm just one little cog in a great big old wheel, but I'm a small cloud, so and I'm just honored to be here. A couple real quick things here. One, some people were talking about resources and such. I'm just going to say Neely Fuller Jr. is a person's book you might want to check out. Neely Fuller, Neely Fuller Jr. I had a chance to speak with him, and he wrote the compensatory codes, and you might want to check that out. And I'm just going to highlight what Neely said is that there's only 3 types of people. So Starter mentioned about the folks who created this whole white supremacy thing in the around the 14th, 15th century, and all European men, French, German, and Dutch. Anyway, it created a whole classification. But Neely Fuller says there's only 3 types of people on the planet and the known universe. I put it that way. He said known universe. He said it was white people, non-white people, and white supremacists. That's what Neely says. Now I'm gonna leave you that, so you can look up his book and see, and there's 9 basic areas that he identifies in terms of people activity that this functions under. I just put that out there. The other one is Marimba Ani Urugu. You might want to take a real good look at that. That's not bedtime reading. You're gonna have to sit up and get into that one, okay? So I just want to, so Marimba Ani's book, Urugu, you might want to take a real good look at that. Which reminds me of someone mentioned Frances Cress Welsing. Frances Cress Welsing, in the early days of Howard, the early 70s, she had told her colleagues who were African American, who were Black males, we need to form a study on white behavior, white male behavior. And unfortunately, the brothers didn't understand the profoundness of their statement, because they told her, no, let white people study themselves. Y'all feel me? This is sister wrote the ISIS papers, and some of y'all know who I'm talking about, so you might want to go look up Dr. Welsing's information as well. And there was 5 times that the United States officially, tried to apologize, for things. And I just want you to understand this. They apologized from shielding a Nazi officer who was wanted for war crimes because he was an informant for them, and he was responsible for massacring or killing, thousands of Jews, and they let him go to Bolivia, the U.S., and then they apologized for lying to the U.S. about hiding him in Bolivia. The internment, of the Japanese, they apologized for that, and they got a penance of $20,000. The overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii. If you understand, who the queen was then. Okay, so just look at. I'm just asking you guys to take a real good look. So these were the apologies of America. And an apology for slavery and the Jim Crow laws, but you got to take a real good look at what that apology was. Bill Clinton at Ebenezer Church some years ago, I'll never forget, all these major Black leaders were there, and he said that that America, needs to atone, needs to repair, what is done to Black folks. And I was just waiting for, for one of those leaders to say, yes, reparations. You just said we need reparations, but nobody jumped on that one. I just had to throw that one out there. Okay. And I just wanted to, just those are the things I wanted to say. There's a lot of work to be done. It's not going to always be easy. And yes, if you're faint of heart, you're going to be challenged, but it's not time for you to be faint of heart because you got allies. I'm here. Those of you that say you wanted a button, I don't know, Fury Alley, perhaps you can hook it up. I don't know, but if you want one, hey, so it's okay. And if we do this again, hopefully I'll find my box full of all of my information about reparations that I was doing back in the day, and I would be more than glad to share with you what we've really done, because there was a lot of work done that the people really don't know, even though we're being attacked all the time. So I want to thank Janita Abadeli and her husband who passed away, and all those folks that created NCOBRA and work with the National Black Lawyers Association. And many of you, I'm just asking you, go look these things up. There's no reason for us not to look it up. You'll be more well informed. I hope that you guys, I hope there's a way that we keep this process going and support the folks, that are here. So Prince and all these folks, I just want to thank all of you and all of you folks that joined us just to even get information. Those of you that shared, Starless, Samantha, all of you, thank you so very much. I'm humbled and I'm honored to be part of this conversation, and hope that whatever I was able to share, the few words, a lot of words I share, but a little bit of information, I hope that it helps you connect with this whole application concept, of reparations, for us, our Black folks. Okay, I just wanted to put that out there. So thank you so very much. I'm humbled and honored.
Okay, so I want to give David Wright the time he wanted to wrap up. And I just want to say thank you, everyone. And if you have a hard time dealing with all of this information in a factual, literal sense, I study Afrofuturism, and I will tell you that alien abduction stories are parallel to the Black experience. David Wright. You got to unmute.
I did, and then I muted myself back again. Sorry about that. Thank you, everybody. Mr. King, Ms. Taylor, Dr. Richmond, you honor us all, and we are blessed to have you sharing with us tonight. So thank you very much. Real quick, I want to one time again remind everybody, we're not part of the Democratic Party. We're not an apparatus. We are a collective of progressives. We are here to lift everybody up and make sure that there are enough seats at the table for everybody that wants to lift everybody up. So that's what I really want everybody to know about that. Lastly, Mike talked about it. There is an ellipse in the chat. That if you hit the little 3-button ellipse, it gives you the chance to save all the chat. There is an enormous wealth of information that was put into the chat. I added a few things. Dr. Richmond put in a few things. There is so much great stuff over there. And I would encourage everybody to download the chat. And this is your final call if you wanted to add anything to the chat. And I want to thank the people in the audience that contributed also. Dahlia, Darwin, Samantha, you all are amazing people, and you added to the gumbo, because that's what I wanted, was to make a big pot of gumbo tonight so that we could raise a little good hell. So, in honor of John Lewis. So let's go out and raise some more hell, some good hell. So thank you, and I'll leave the meeting running for about 5 or 10 more minutes. If you want to chat amongst yourselves, feel free to unmute yourselves and chat. And if you want to run away and get a good night's sleep, run away and get a good night's sleep. Mike, do you have anything you want to add real quick?
Well, I am blown away. This meeting was great and a major eye opener for this white guy. A little bit of business, a very slight amount of business, and basically a suggestion is that within 24 hours, we've been recording this. This will be on the PDA-CA YouTube channel. Take a look at it, share it with your friends. We'll send out the link to it so you can get to it directly without having to search for the PDA-CA YouTube channel. And unless there's a major objection, those of you who attended and registered for this meeting, we'd like to put you on our email list so we can keep you informed as to what our meetings are like. So thanks everybody for coming. As I say, I'm totally blown away. This is way up at the top of our list, all-time list of fantastic, educational, eye-opening meetings. Thanks.
Where's the ellipsis button where you see? I'm not real technical, so where do I save this? The chat?
In the right hand.
At the bottom. I'm sorry.
It says it has like two, and then you'll see a little file, and then there's a little button that has 3 little dots on it.
Yes.
Click the 3 dots.
That button, and then slide up where it says save chat, save chat.
Okay, it says participant. Oh, there you go. There you go. Thank you.
Yes, and incidentally, it will be in the document folder of your computer under a folder named Zoom, of all things.
And so before we close, totally unrelated, not a PDA-CA sponsored event, I'm hosting an Afrofuturism Dream Tank at UC San Diego on the 14th of February in celebration of Black History Month, as well as the opening of the UC San Diego Craft Center space. It'll be a virtual event where I'll have art, music, poetry, conversation, and it'll be interactive. You'll be engaging in an art project where we will immerse ourselves in the past, the present, think about the future, and share our visions of the future and what we can do individually and collectively to get there. If you're interested, just go to drlawana.com and subscribe, and I'll send you an email as soon as we create the Zoom link. I'll have it this week. I just want to make sure that you didn't miss the opportunity to know about it. It's free, open to the public, 1 p.m., February 14th. Thank you.
What a Valentine's gift.
I have a question. Is this the end?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
okay.
Open to everybody to chat and ask questions and whatever.
Okay, so I'm very much an action-oriented type of person. So I had sent a question to Lawana. So what's next, right? So I have a couple questions. Is there a committee that's forming right now to start the list of reparations in San Diego, similar to what's going on in Oregon right now and some other places? And
so,
do you
want me to answer the first question?
Yes.
All right, so the answer to that question is after the bill passed, there were some task forces set up, and it's being looked at on a statewide level. That task force does include some local participation, especially considering that the bill was authored by Dr. Shirley Weber. Now, I wanted to put that there, but then you had another question.
Oh, I think, you know what? What's next? I think you just answered both questions.
Yeah, and so the other part of that, Dr. Fishman did kind of allude to some conversation about resurrecting in Cobra in San Diego. And we've got Kahalifah King on the line here. So I think just from this meeting and the level of engagement, there are people that would be willing to support that effort. So I say go forth and support that effort. The other thing is there are people who said they wanted buttons, and it's in the chat, but what would be super duper helpful is just an email that says, I want a buttons. And with your information, and then I'll work with Kahalifah to figure out how we can connect you with somebody.
Right. Right, and I would say to follow up with that, Darwin had put in there that gave you the address, the email address for Encobra. And if you're not certain about Encobra, you can go on there because they also on the website, it also gives resources of other organizations that's working on reparations as well. And so I'm just going to encourage you to to do that. And then that'll help you determine what you think you might want to do here locally or otherwise. Okay. So, and I am here. And Darwin, thank you for, what you had to say, because that puts a spark under me to maybe what we can do is get another, if people are interested in a chapter of Encobra, then I wouldn't have any problem in trying to help further that along, and establishing that and make that real, because it is so much more, it is so needed. And I would be more of a historical person. We need some new, fresh blood. We got Prince. I'm there. I can help. Whatever you guys want to do, I can bring the history. I've got all kinds of history and facts and stuff that I can't pull out my head because this old brain gets kind of tired sometimes. But I'm still strong. Okay. Okay. So I'm just letting you know I have all kind of stuff I'm willing to share. It's not mine to keep, it's mine to share and give and help you, determine where you think you want to be in this movement. Okay.
In
Yeah,
addition
that's
to
great.
that,
Oh, sorry.
in addition to that, thank you